Greetings, I am Toglin, Hell's Harlequin, but you may call me Tog. Yes, I'm still alive. Yay! So, what happened to me? Well, I had another huge breakdown, just ridiculously big breakdown. I actually lost like a quarter or a third of my hair, but my hair is ridiculously thick, so no one really notices. I notice though, and it bugs me. So I was recommended to basically cut out anything non-essential in my life to reduce my stress levels, so I decided to stop making videos, full stop. I know I was very inconsistently making them to begin with, but I felt kind of like making a video because, weirdly enough, this is a topic I'm passionate about. Because we're going to be talking about whether or not trans women have an unfair advantage in sports. I'm not a huge sports fan myself, but I do fancy the Olympics once in a while, because it's not like I have to watch them every year, and it's just kind of fun. The only ones I really enjoy would be running, swimming. I think that's it. I just watch running and swimming for Summer Olympics, and I only watch figure skating for Winter Olympics. Oh, occasionally I'll also pay attention to gymnastics. But anyways, let's dig right into the article. I just went ahead and looked at this from a everyday feminism article, but I'm just using this as a sort of sounding board to help bring out my opinions. The very first part of this article is just a little story about how a trans woman throws a race because she's too afraid to win, because she's afraid that the cis women will think that she has unfair advantages. So let's go right to the heart of it. People who are opposed to trans women participating in women's athletics are mostly concerned about fairness. The fear of men masquerading as women to gain medals and glory has a long history, but one grounded in very few real-world examples. Oh, hey, the writer is willing to admit that there is some real-world examples. Yay. It has, however, resulted in decades of humiliating gender test policies for women athletes. People generally have an assumption that trans women have an inherent, permanent athletic advantage for life based on the gender they're assigned at birth. Off-sided factors against trans women participating in women's sports include height, weight, narrow hips supposedly making it easier to run, smaller breasts making arm movement more free, wider shoulders, and larger rib cage meaning greater lung capacity. You also forgot greater muscle density and bone density. The common trope for trans women is that we're all tall, narrow-hipped, small-breasted, and masculine appearing. This simply isn't true. I happen to be tall, 6'1", but wide-hipped. I also have trans friends who are 5'4" and 130 pounds. You don't generally see the 5'4", 130-pound trans ladies competing in Olympic sports. Sorry, but that doesn't generally happen from my knowledge. Trans women have bodies that are just as varied in size and shape as cis women. That might be true. I mean, we look at Blair White and then we look at, Caitlyn Jenner. Very different size and shape. Blair's very passing, and Caitlyn, was an athlete at one point. So you have a lot of very masculine appearance and bone structure. And obviously Caitlyn transitioned a lot later in life. When it comes to athletes in general, there is a lot more similar body shape and structure than there is with the general population because, you're sort of working the human body to a peak performance structure, and there might be some variations in heights and whatnots, but when you actually look at the athletes lined up, they're all quite similar, so I would even argue that as a factor there. Moreover, what opponents to trans women's inclusion in female athletics often gloss over is the drastic effects that standard regimen of hormone replacement therapy, HRT, has on the athletic performance of trans women. For trans people, the question whether to begin HRT is a very personal one. Not all trans people end up on hormones or transitioning. When it comes to competitive trans athletes, however, there are various requirements laid out by governing sports bodies concerning HRT, treatment, and athletics eligibility to compete. Such requirements often differ between the sexes. Last January, the International Olympic Committee has lifted its requirement that trans women undergo gender reassignment surgery before competing, stating that trans women assigned male at birth must complete a full year of HRT before being considered eligible to compete as women, while trans men, assigned female at birth, continue to be free to compete at any point in their choosing. Well, that's because Well, testosterone is a very powerful hormone. Very, very powerful. So, the thing is, trans men competing, female to male, will have an automatic disadvantage when it comes to competing in male athleticism. So, I don't see why. I mean, it makes perfect sense that that would be less regulated than male to female, because male to female there is definitely advantages. Well, female to male, you're playing with a bit of a handicap. In fact, there is a trans male hockey player, Harrison Brown, who has decided to put off testosterone treatment until his playing career in National Women's Hockey League is over. You see, why can't this be a thing for female to male athletes? Male to female athletes is usually when it comes to athleticism, you're going to retire at pretty early age. Like, you're going to retire at 30. In certain sports like gymnastics, you're going to be retiring in your early 20s. So my question is, why don't you just compete as a male but identify as female? Because that seems to be perfectly allowed. And I hear trans activists all the time saying that, you know, if you're trans, you're trans. It doesn't matter if you're currently going through hormone treatment or not. So why don't you just compete in the men's category with pigtails and call yourself Betty? It's fine. I don't think anyone would really have issues with that, but anyways, moving on. To understand how HRT affects trans athletes requires a basic understanding of hormones. Estrogen and testosterone are the two primary sex hormones, and both affect the body in very different ways. Testosterone's big advantage is it tends to build up muscle more efficiently than estrogen does. You hear women complain about how men can lose weight faster than women can. Testosterone is the reason why. More muscle gives a person the ability to burn fat at higher rates. This is why those with bodies who run on testosterone generally, but not always, appear leaner. It's also important to understand just how hormone replacement therapy affects trans women's bodies. Speaking from personal experience, the loss of strength is jarring. I started HRT in mid-April of this year, and before I moved out of my house June 1st, I struggled to open jars. My pre-mile splits dropped from 9.5-minute miles to 11-minute miles seemingly overnight. Now 6 months into HRT, fat redistribution has made my hips and rear end bigger. I'm growing a chest, and this has the added effect of reintorting my spine to accommodate the new weight in new places, meaning my doctor recorded my height has shrunk from 6'2" to 6'1", with more height loss expected. Not every trans woman will lose heights, but it's common enough that most of my friends have lost an inch or two from HRT. Now, I do kind of wonder if height loss happens with athletes because they would naturally have more muscle to support their bone structure. I don't know. I couldn't really find anything one way or another about that. Critical to understand how trans athletes are discriminated against is an understanding of how hormone levels differ between men and women. During the Olympics this year, we heard much talk of Caster Semenya, who is intersex, and her naturally high testosterone levels. Even though Caster Semenya isn't trans, her story provides an apt introduction on how sex hormones affect athletic performance, and how the media can be misleading concerning these effects. Outlets commonly reported that, without context, that Semenya's hormone levels were 3 times higher than the average woman's, and were in fact approaching the levels of an average man. Men generally have the T levels that fall between 300 to 1,000 nanograms per deciliter, while cis women typically have T levels 15 to 70 nanograms through deciliter range. So even if Semenya had 3 times testosterone of a natural woman, that high amount of testosterone would still fall within the average range for a man. Well, yeah. Okay, Semenya, or Caster Semenya, is a very, very interesting case because some consider her a man, but it's interesting because she's a woman with an XY chromosome but isn't trans. And you might be thinking, what? XY chromosome, that makes you a man, or that makes you trans at least. Well, there is a very, very, very rare condition in which something goes wrong with the fetal development where the body should be biologically male, but instead of the testicles dropping, it's like there's a design problem where instead the testicles pull up into the body and go where the uterus would go, and everything basically develops as if you're a female. So Caster developed as she was a female. Everyone thought she was female at birth. she's been treated like a female her entire life, and her hormone levels, because of the fact that her testicles would be up inside her body and never dropped, they're quite useless, so they don't produce nearly the amount of testosterone as what a man would. So, whether you consider Castor male, female, or something in between, I can see why she's very upset with the fact that people call her a male, because she's been referred to a female all 28 years of her life. So it's a very interesting case. I know that she also doesn't consider herself trans at all. From what I understand, she personally doesn't even consider herself intersex. When asked questions about that, she says she is a woman, she runs fast, and this is how God made her. So it's a very interesting story, but I noticed that a lot of trans activists like to sort of drag her as like this big icon of she's allowed to, so trans women are allowed to. It's just, I would like to know what you guys think in the comments when it comes to Castor, because sure, chromosomally she's male, but she has all the outward appearance of female and has a much lower testosterone level than the average male, so yeah, I'd like to know what you guys think about that. Further, the difference in performance between men and women in speed-based sports is about 11%. In other words, a woman's times will run around 11% slower than a man's on comparable competitive levels. When unreported that Semenya's 2016 gold medal winning 800-meter dash was actually 13% slower than the men's. Now, okay, darling, the man's broke a world record that year. And Semenya is 5'10". The one who won men's gold medal is like 6'2", I believe. I'll have to relook that up, or I won't be bothered with it. But either way, I know that that was actually a world record breaker, so that's a little bit unusual. And Semenya's not a trans woman. Like, whether you consider her a woman, a man, or whatever, she is not trans. I would consider her a woman, because it seems a little mean to call her a man. You know, she was raised as a woman. She looks like a woman. Well, she's kind of manly if you look at her face, but you know what I mean. Naked, she looks like a woman. Standard HRT treatment for trans women includes testosterone blocker. Usually, I'm not going to pronounce the names. I'm going to butcher them and stumble, so no. Which is also prescribed to cis women with hormone deficiencies to alleviate menopause symptoms. Testosterone by far is the most powerful sex hormone. So testosterone blocker is definitely needed. Otherwise, estrogen would simply be swallowed by its counterpart. This is why trans women take 2 forms of medications for HRT, while trans men just have to inject testosterone. The effects of T blockers on trans women are astounding. Dosing typically starts small and expands over the first 9 months to a year, but when the medicinal regimen is in full effect, trans women's T levels are typically lower than cis women's. The Olympic Committee now requires a full year of T levels to be below 10 nanograms per deciliter. That is a lie. That is a big lie, and that just kind of makes me angry, because that makes it sound like, if we look up here, it says, because I actually fact-checked this, and yes, the average woman's T levels are between 15 and 70 nanograms per deciliter range, right? Well, what they're not saying is the Olympic Committee requires trans women to be between, let me find that again, below 10 nanograms per deciliter. It's nanograms per liter, not deciliter. That is a huge difference, like ridiculously huge difference. Let's look at this converter. Let's go with 10 nanograms per liter, calculate. And let's look at what that is, nanograms per deciliter. That would be 288.42, which is really high, actually. Like, that is much higher than the average woman. Whoops. And let's see, how much does that fall? Yeah, that falls very slightly under the normal for a typical guy. So that's still over 3 times higher than the high end of a woman's range. That's like around, I think that's actually higher than Semenya's testosterone. So that's kind of crazy. Recently, though, because this is a little bit of an older article, they have changed it to where a trans woman has to actually have their T level from from 10 nanograms to 5 nanograms. And let's see how much 5 is. Calculate. And if an average woman's, like, the high end is 70, even at 5, that would be 144 nanograms per deciliter, which is still double that of a higher end of women, so that still is not entirely fair. I don't know, though. But here's the thing. What they're not saying, because I'm going to link the study, but they found, independent researchers have found that even when you can get a trans athlete to the same hormone levels of a biological woman, the problem is they went through male puberty. Like, not even Simenya has gone through a full male puberty because, like I said, Simenya, the testicles are kind of atrophied up inside her body. So they've never produced the level of testosterone of that of a fully functional male. The thing is, during puberty, you would have the biggest spikes of testosterone, and that would increase your bone density, increase a whole bunch of factors, as well as, sure, there is a big initial strength loss when you first start taking HRT, but they found that over a year on HRT, your muscle mass does not shrink as much as they originally thought it would. So basically all that shrinking you do in the first few months, that's it. After a point, you're still more resilient. And if you manage to build up a whole bunch of muscles and be in peak performance in your teens during your male puberty, you're not going to lose as much of that as you think you would. So therefore, even if you can get your hormones to even maybe lower than that of a biological woman, because of the fact that you have gone through a male puberty, you'd still have a big advantage. I don't know if any of you know about the Blade Runners. I know that Marcus Rem's bid to compete in the 2016 Olympics in Rio was denied because he could not prove that his carbon fiber blades did not give him an advantage, despite the fact that Oscar Pistorius, I probably butchered his last name, but whatever, made history being the first amputee athlete to compete in the Olympics. Now that was a huge controversy whether or not that was fair. So you have to kind of put your emotions aside with fairness. And it's interesting that more people are throwing a fit that trans people aren't allowed to compete in the Olympics, yet most people sort of say, okay, I can see how that's unfair when it comes to the amputees, which, I don't know. I just find this whole topic very interesting, and I would love to know what you guys' thoughts are on this. I could keep going, but I think I've said all I could, and she's just going to waffle on about how, nothing's fair. Should we stop tall girls from competing? Anyways, I've said my piece. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, and I wish all of you a pleasant rest of your day.